All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to the creative event and listening to me. I'm going to be your keynote speaker, and today I'm going to be going back and forth between a little bit of a presentation. Hope it goes smoothly. I know it's a little bit of a strange time for everyone, but bear with me, and here we go. So today we are going to talk about how Southeast Asia will create the next animated global hit. So before I go any further, I do want to thank Creativity Without Boundaries and the two people who really helped put this together, which was Vernon and Ms. Linda. They've been working with me every day to try to make sure that this content is appropriate for you, and I just want to thank them for all their efforts. So let me tell you a little bit about what you're going to get in this initial session. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and about my 26-year history in the world of animation. Then I'm going to talk about some noteworthy points about the worldwide creative scene in order to set the palette for where we go from here. After that, I'm going to go into how Southeast Asia will track its path towards success, and then we'll go to question and answer. So I hope you enjoy, and here we go. Right, so first thing about me, I've been in the industry for about 26 years now. So I've worked for a lot of different companies. I worked for MTV in the 90s is where I started. I worked in different production companies, distributors, every facet of the animation world I've kind of found myself in, and have worked as mostly a producer, but also as a writer and a development executive with the sole purpose of trying to bring new animated series to life. So if you look at that 26 years, this is kind of some of the things I've accomplished. I've worked on shows that are very adult, I've worked on shows that are very kid-friendly, and I've worked on music videos, promotional films, and a few features. And, when you add up the 20-plus animated series that I completed, that sounds like a lot, but what's even more is underneath that is something like the 70 to 75 pilots, animatics, and projects that never made it. So in my history, I've kind of worked around the world in a lot of different places, so I got exposure to a lot of different parts of the world and a lot of different methods of working, so I've kind of experienced all that. And I think all of that really brought to my attention what it means actually to be Filipino-American. So, as a Southeast Asian who grew up in America, I found myself often in between the world, sometimes a little bit of East and a little bit of West. So I was very delighted to be asked to become the keynote speaker because I feel like a lot of my career I've lived on that bridge between Asia and America, and I've done my best to try to bring those influences to the West and also bring Western influences to the East. So back to the presentation. After all this time working in the industry, I sometimes feel like, I've certainly seen a lot. So, there's a part of me that goes, hey, I'm an old guard here, and I've done and seen it all. But the more I observe the animation industry, the more I see it change. I realize that I'm still here, I'm still surviving, and to that effect, I actually launched an educational platform called Surviving Animation, where I try to take all my experiences and everything that I've learned and try to put it all into a place where, a young producer, a young director, or maybe even an artist or an animator who's been at it for a long time and wants to move in animation can benefit from my experience for free. So, if you'd like to go to that YouTube channel, I would be happy to have you there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the worldwide creative scene in 2020. So, like I said, I've seen animation change and move around a lot. I've seen a lot of different waves of trends. And I feel like now, more than ever in my entire life, is one of the true renaissances of the animation art form. I mean, we're seeing things now that I would have never imagined, that people have never imagined would be possible 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And, seeing things like Enter the Spider-Verse, or I Lost My Body, or Hilda, or Neja. I mean, these types of stories, these types of voices, for the first time are being seen by audiences around the world. So I'm personally excited about that because that means that we have a chance to express ourselves. We have a chance to show the world as Southeast Asians, what we can do, what we can show, what stories we have to tell. So go back to that. Even within this renaissance, I think it's important to kind of mention to people that, we're no longer playing in the standard buckets of genre that we used to know. I mean, kids, comedy, preschool, adult, it's all becoming much more nuanced. It's all becoming much more subtle in how stories are being told. So for example, I actually was recently thinking about all the new subgenres of even adult animation. An adult animation is something that you might imagine is just, primetime comedies like Family Guy or The Simpsons, but it's much more detailed now and there's much more possibilities. So, in the 14 plus superhero zone, there's this whole rise of DC animation or Marvel animation, which tells a more nuanced superhero story than the traditional kid stuff, but it's not quite adult yet. There is, of course, the standard 18 plus primetime, which is, your usual suspects of comedies meant for the widest audiences possible, told in very simple shapes and characters. But you're also getting this kind of 18 plus stylish and absurd type of comedy. So, whether it's an Adult Swim show, which is a big thing in the United States, or, Rick and Morty, which is really takes so many left and right turns that you're so surprised at how unusual it can be. It's not a standard format, family-friendly comedy at all. And then there's even, to go further, the what I call the 35 plus morally complex adult animation. So those are shows like BoJack Horseman or Undone on Amazon, where we're tackling very, very complicated stories that you might only suspect would be in live action and really be reserved completely for adults. And not just for young adults, but for adults who have lived lives, who understand the hardships of the human condition. And these are very, very dark shows, but that's where adult animation has kind of sprawled itself out. Now, even in kids animation, there's also a lot of new subgenres I thought would be worth mentioning before we go into how Southeast Asia can make its big global hit. Even in the 6 to 11 category, one that you might suspect is mostly action comedy. There's a lot of new nuance there too. So there's a genre I like to call the girls' soap action. So that shows like The Miraculous Ladybug, where really the A story, really the main plot is about relationships and emotion and harmony between characters. And the supervillain complex, the supervillain versus superhero, that's important. It's there. It's just not the focus. So really, I think what audiences are there for is to watch the soap opera part and get action on the side. Whereas when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, we had it the other way around. We all cared about the action plot first. And, there was a B story about the emotions as well. So in addition to the girls' soap action, there's also what I call the woke and wacky adventure. These are shows like Steven Universe, which really promotes a lot of inclusivity, different perspectives on lives, different lifestyles. And I think it's a really incredible thing for kids to see, seeing a main character with all female parents and seeing characters who are, they could be gay or non-binary, and, just have kids really exposed to this, I think is really good. But at the same time, these shows are really unafraid to be wacky, silly, completely unhinged. And I think that creativity is wonderful right now. So the last of the new subgenres I will call the kid influencers. And I think sometimes we forget as producers and distributors that, that we control, or we believe that we control what kids are watching. But in honesty, with platforms like YouTube and Twitch, really there's so many animators out there and storytellers just directly getting to kids. I mean, whether they're streaming Fortnite, or they're commentating on Minecraft, or retelling American movie stories, or like you'll see here, there's a Filipino there named Domix, who just tells a lot about his personal life, and he has a great YouTube channel that just describes his daily experiences. So it's a very unedited, direct-to-consumer experience. So those are really interesting new genres. So I think it's important for not only for producers and directors and artists and animators and writers in Southeast Asia and in the world to not just make, but to constantly be watching and observing and seeing how trends go. So I really try to make it personally a habit to just watch 3 to 5 or 10 episodes of anything new that comes out, regardless of the genre. And you know, that's one of the basic secrets of trying to keep in touch with how the world market is changing and how tastes and behaviors and styles are moving forward. But I also want to say that anything you watch, don't forget that that's probably was greenlit 2 to 3 years ago. So watching is great, but it also is a way to ensure you're always a little bit behind. Okay, so let's get back to the subject at hand. And that is, with all these market conditions, all this new renaissance of animation, how is Singapore going to make the next hit? Well, I put that into a 3-part plan. So I'm going to overview it, and we're going to go into it. Okay, ready? All right, so my 3-part plan of how Southeast Asia will create the next global hit involves 1, using the local flora, not the roots; 2, East stealing East and West; and 3, being the native rebel master. So I'll go into a little more detail of all of these, but to overview for you, you know, using the local flora, not the roots, means really just teasing the scent of the culture and having friendly development. The part about East meets steals East and West is really how we can ride the anime wave and also do everything we can to reverse the Western savior narrative and try to steal it back and you know, make more pro-Asia stories for the world to understand and see. And then finally, you know, being a rebel, being a native rebel master requires a little bit of discussion on how to do that, but it really involves or requires a frustrated mastering, which I'll explain, and a itching desire to update the status quo. Okay, so let's go into the first point. What does local flora, not local roots mean? So as you can see here on the left, you know, I kind of just grabbed 3 random flowers that represent some of the national flowers of some of the countries within Southeast Asia. And as an Asian American, and as you know, most of the time an American, this is kind of what I might understand from Asia, you know, kind of a general feeling, tone, and scent. So when I think about Southeast Asia, this is some of the imagery that might come to mind. So when Southeast Asia is going to try to make the next global hit, I think it's important that whatever we do, we start by marketing the uniquely Southeast Asian scent of the culture. So what is the tease that brings everyone in? What is the local flavor? What is the local scent that people can just very quickly scan through a bunch of animated programs and say, that one is definitely Southeast Asian. Now, I tried again use this specific term flora because it doesn't go that deep. It should just be very intuitive and quick and marketable, okay? So that leads into my second point, which is as you do development on these ideas, the development should actually be simple and universal based on that scent. The story can then be deeply immersive and specific, but I always try to tell people, don't let the development be too complicated. You know, make it very easy, snap of the fingers to understand, and then let your episodes go into the nuance. So as you see there in the point below, you know, don't pressure your audiences to know the inside truth. You know, you just want to tease them and get them in and have fun later, but don't burden them with all this world history and all this important socio-political nuances and inside jokes. That doesn't bring audiences in. That lets audiences enjoy once they're there. That doesn't necessarily tease them to come in, okay? So as I work in development, a lot of what I focus on is actually the pilot, which is, you know, really the first bit of marketing almost every TV series has that really lets people understand where the series, whether it be comedy or action or educational, you know, the pilot really defines what the rest of the tone will be. So I try to tell people in the pilot, you know, really focus on painting that digestible little picture, you know, of your marketing promise, you know, and make sure that where you are in the pilot is what I'll call tourist friendly. So make it easy to get, easiest to want us to explore more, but not so deep that, that we already feel lost. We should just feel interested. Okay, so that's my discussion on local flora, not local roots. Let me go to point 2, which is now that you've established what is your essentially unique Southeast Asian brand, how do you use some of the things out there to take those trends and take that world audience and move your product? So, all right, East steals East and West. So, you probably obviously see I'm doing a play on words of East meets West. But what I'm trying to explain here is that everybody is already fusing anime. It's just a fact. A generation now draws like this. So a lot of people, even especially older executives like myself, we talk about anime fusion, we talk about influences. But when it gets down to the level of people actually enjoying or writing and creating this stuff, they just see it all as the same thing. I remember back at my days of working at MTV in the 90s, I was always struck by the hip hop pitch, which is people would come in and try to tell us how big hip hop was and how important it was and how this show was all about hip hop and cartoons and you have to do it. But in many ways that I think is the anime is the kind of the hip hop word right now, which is if it isn't organically integrated into everything that you normally do and you normally create, you might be a little bit kind of behind the wave. You might be of an older generation who doesn't understand that a lot of kids have already watched 5, 6, 7 seasons of Naruto and Dragon Ball and really have a deep cultural understanding, regardless of where they come from, of how stories work in the anime world. So let's just use it. Let's just understand that is the nature of current storytelling more than it is something we're pulling from Japan or from the East. So, all right, back to the presentation. All right. So as you can see here, I have some of the examples of what are shows that typically you would associate as anime fusion. So, Dragon Prince, Avatar, Boondocks, and Teen Titans. These get talked about a lot. But I really wanted to highlight some other ones I think don't get enough attention. I think Frozen is one of those movies that, maybe I'm alone in the world, but I think it's very anime influenced in terms of its character design. And I really think what Irvin On is doing in Singapore with Robot Playground, this kind of slice of life stories that really take, a loose Miyazaki mold, but at the same time, not just doing Studio Ghibli. They're really trying to create a Singapore flavor. I just think it's really fantastic work. And I think Irvin's doing a really great job of integrating the best of anime and integrating the best of Singapore into a cohesive voice. So, and on the right is actually a program called Wakfu, which is a really great French and Japanese production. Again, very European, but also very organically, almost Nintendo video game anime. So, okay, so that is what I say East steals East and West. So now that we've covered East, let's go into the West part. So I will say this with a certain amount of discomfort because I'm an American and an Asian, but there is a tradition in Hollywood and in Western filmmaking to depict the Western savior or the noble foreign tourist in Asia. And I think there's a long tradition and there's a frustration with these kind of projects. I mean, there's this idea that in order to, for a character like Batman, for example, to be trained, he's got to go to Asia and, get some kind of strange mystical training, but then somehow be the ultimate fighter of all the people in Asia and come back and be the world's superhero. Or, a character like Doctor Strange in the Marvel movies who, again, goes to an Asian territory and gets their magical secret sauce and comes back and just for the fact that he's a Western Caucasian man, suddenly is better than everyone else who's been training for generations and generations on it. So I, think it's a format that has worked and, we kind of can all sense what it is. It's, do we place these characters, either with local or foreign clothing against the backdrop of Asia, but then we, it kind of creates this, the Asians are slightly lesser than the main character, or the main character stands out more, a little bit more different. So I think it is often unaware or truly ignorant, but sometimes, or worse, maybe they just don't care. So I think that part worries me a lot. So Against that, though, I will say in Hollywood over the past few years, and even in the animation world, there's been a lot of pushback against this kind of Western savior complex, against this kind of like, let's take a white character and have them learn Kung Fu, or, you know, let's do an Iron Fist style TV series. So even though there's been decades and decades of it done in that method, I think there's a lot of change. And in fact, one important change that I want to highlight to everyone, especially in Southeast Asia, is something that is coming out in March 12th, 2021. So if you already know what that is, you're probably shaking your head there virtually. But if you don't know what it is, I am about to show you, and that's something that everyone in Southeast Asia has to be aware of, which is Raya and the Last Dragon. So Raya and the Last Dragon is going to be the next entry into the Disney feature animated world that will, for the first time, really highlight Southeast Asia as a backdrop. So, you know, going from Moana, going from Mulan, you know, going from Frozen, you know, kind of, you know, Coco, kind of touring all these different cultures. The next up is going to be Southeast Asia, and that's coming really soon. So you can see here from the creative people behind it that it is a mixed bag. I mean, I can't say I'm super excited that both directors are not Southeast Asian, but at the same time, the writers are, and Kelly Marie Tran is going to play the lead voice of the main character. So I think that's progress. I think that's really good. But at the same time, it's dangerous. What if with all their money and all their power and all their ability, they make, you know, the perennial Southeast Asian fantasy film? Where does that leave the rest of us? Well, we don't know. We just have to be aware that it's out there and know that it's a target that we have to move ourselves around. So what do we do with all this? So now that we know that there's anime on one side, that there's Western stuff on the other side, that the West has sometimes kind of colonized and taken Asian stories and made it for themselves, how do we do it on our own? Well, I think Southeast Asia could integrate. You know, so basically we want to fuse the best from anime and the West, and I don't think we have to ask permission. And I think that Southeast Asia has already done a really good job with some of its CG features. And actually on the bottom right is a new show from Disney Channel called Amphibia, which is a Thai American girl. So, you know, seeing characters like Michelle Yeoh play a Star Trek captain, and by the way, today's Star Trek Day, if anyone cares. And then, you know, Dave Bautista, who's a Filipino-American, to play an Avenger. You know, all this stuff is just really great progress. And I think that's promising for everyone and should make everyone feel like we're ready to tell our stories. So now that we know, you know, the idea of taking local flora and local roots and being honest to ourselves and kind of giving a tourist-friendly bit of development, and then fusing what's happening in the world market of, you know, anime influence, East meets West, and also subgenres, the final question comes down is, who will be the one? Who will be the person or company or author, creator, director, showrunner who will actually bring Southeast Asia to the next level? Well, I'm going to tell you the type of person I suspect it will be. All right. So who will take the challenge? So I'd like to talk about something I call the native rebel master. So these are examples of people who I really respect. I know I put myself up there, so I realize that's kind of strange. But these are people who have changed the game in the industry of animation. You know, for whatever reason, the product they made was not the same as everyone else's. It was groundbreaking. It was different. It was loud. It was unique. It had voice. You know, so what drove these kind of people to do this kind of thing? Well, let me break down what I think creates the native rebel master. So first off, let's talk about the word native. Now, native, I refer to as a person who was trained or raised in the territory from which they changed the game. So, and you know, if you talk about like Peter Ramsey, who did Spider-Verse, you know, he worked in live action storyboarding in Hollywood for years and years and years, and actually did some animated features before doing Spider-Verse. So what you're seeing he did is he mastered a traditional medium. He did not break the rules. He actually just played along with them very, very well for decades. You know, same with Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon, who created Rick and Morty, you know, really grew as a writer and trained himself as a writer, working on shows like Community, learning how to deal with cast and story, and really honing his art as a writer, as a person with a point of view. And then myself as well. You know, when I'd done Afro Samurai in 2005, I'd already worked in the industry for about 10 to 12 years. I'd been on the network side of MTV. I'd seen a lot of primetime shows, and I'd done 60, 70 pilots and put, you know, 12, 13 TV series on the air. So we mastered that traditional medium. But underneath that, the people who I've been highlighting, they have an outsider's point of view. And I think that comes probably from a combination of awards and scars. Maybe just they're somehow built differently. Somehow they just think a little bit outside the box. But even though they've been within the system, they just never 100% fit in. And sometimes you see a checkered past by some of these people who really change the game, because it takes a while for them to find their true stride. So going from the outsider's point of view, they will then naturally, I think if they stay in the industry that long, get a love for the potential of the craft. So they'll become visionary over time as their talent and their skills marinate. And then this rising restlessness will come up, and what they'll want is to update the status quo. So, you know, I kind of put a few animated characters up there, which I think in many ways typify what the native rebel master is. So it's someone within the system. It's someone who is a fan, is a hardcore believer, but then somehow doesn't 100% believe, and they want to change, and they won't rest until they change. So, all right, well, that is really the summary of my talk. You know, I mean, as you see, the way I believe Southeast Asia will create the next animated global hit is to use that local flora, not the roots. You know, really tease the scent and have friendly development. Make sure you happily steal East and West, you know, which is ride the anime wave, and take the idea that the West did to the East and just flip it. You know, let's take their stories and take their characters and their backdrops and put our Asian faces on it. And then somewhere within the system, whether it's yourself or whether it's someone else, you know, find that native rebel master, you know, kind of find that person or entity or author that is so eccentric and strange and frustrated and brilliant, but yet still within the system and knows how to make things happen and knows how to move around the politics and the finances and the distribution to get something made, which always takes a team of people. But, you know, that master will be the key. So I hope you enjoyed. That is my basic presentation. And so I suppose if you have any question and answer, we'll go from there.
Well, Eric, firstly, I just want to say thanks for that. Fascinating. Very, very fascinating. We do have a series of questions here, so I'm sure you haven't had a chance to look because you're obviously presenting. So
I have not.
How does the subgenre affect the industry in terms of pitching and production pipelines?
That's an excellent question. So I think what subgenre has done, and also more importantly, what the wave of point of view has done to the industry is, I think before this, you know, there was a lot of buyers who were really strictly buying for a target idea. So, you know, I want a 4 to 7 bridge educational show, or I want a 6 to 11, you know, girl-centric comedy, social, emotional. So that still takes place. But when subgenre and point of view comes in, I feel like buyers are now moving to buy shows from talent more than they are to fulfill pipelines of needs. So I think that's really affecting how creators are presenting. You know, you're no longer kind of raising this thing up to a buyer and say, please, please, you know, buy my show. You're actually much more confidently able to say, this is the unique perspective I have. No one else has it. And authenticity is the key seller above and beyond anything else.
Thank you very much. Next up from Ayuni, what is your opinion with YouTube animators' way of telling stories by using mainly static images and then call them animation?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I mean, I think people in the industry, might get caught up with the semantics of what something is. What is anime? What is moving? What is animation? What is a video game versus, an animated series? All those things I feel don't matter to kids. Kids, and for adults for that matter too, or big kids, let's call it, we want to enjoy entertainment. So if I'm looking at a still image and it's making me laugh or making me feel an emotion or teaching me something, I don't care really if it moves or not. And I think if you try to put that artificial set of rules over it, you kind of get away from the idea of what is pure entertainment. If you're looking at the Pixar lamp and saying, how come it doesn't have a face? You're missing the point. The point is that entertainment should be pure, it should work, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Does that also apply, this is a personal question for me, in terms of the quality of animation? Because one of the comedies I like to watch is home movies. I don't know if you've watched it, but the animation isn't top tier, but the content itself is so strong. I think, is that a key message to get across as well?
I've always been a little bit of, maybe an outsider in that I sometimes don't want shows to look that good, right? I think there's a moment where you cross a line and you start to animate for the sake of animation or render for the point of rendering. But, especially when it comes to comedy, if you can't clearly feel the comedy of the piece because there's too much movement or too much animation, again, you're missing the point of what that medium does very well. I think one of the funniest things that I watch one of my nephews watch is it's a still image, I think of like a Street Fighter character, and all it is him saying like, rah, but at 10% speed, 20% speed, 500% speed, and it's all this funny sound going back, but it's a still image. And it's just like a character in the middle of a YouTube video, and he just laughs and laughs and laughs, and I go, that's good entertainment.
True, very, very true. A question here from Muhammad Jalullah Alam, who says, like the native rebel master perspective, do you see mastery of the or can the scars or learnings come from working the region as well?
I'm sorry, I missed just a little bit of that. Could you say that part again? Sorry.
I'll read out the whole question again. Like the native rebel master perspective, do you see mastery of the medium as exclusively from the West, or can the scars or learnings come from working the region?
That's a really good question. And I think mastery is a subjective term in a way. If you are the ultimate, hand puppet artist, and that's how you express, then mastery could be you just sitting in your own, basement and doing it for 10 years. So did that answer the question properly? I think I might have still missed it.
I hope so. On the concept of the rebel master perspective, I just had a question which popped up in my head. When did this concept for you really come about? Because I remember growing up and animation was very formulaic, episode of the week. But then in the 2000s, we got the Adult Swim content, and then suddenly Space Ghost Coast to Coast, Birdman. That for me, Venture Brothers, which just got cancelled yesterday, I believe, really sort of changed the game in terms of what can be enjoyed from animation. I mean, as a history buff, where do you think this sort of concept started, really?
Well, I got the idea really from reading about Eiji Tsuburaya. So I don't know if you can see behind me, but I'm a big Ultraman fan. I've been an Ultraman fan for a long time since I was a little kid. And Eiji Tsuburaya was a master of Godzilla special effects, and he actually was making all these creatures all the time. But he decided, he was frustrated, so he changed the game. He decided to not do any more monsters, to do this slick alien hero. But he knew the craft. He knew how to make monster movies. But he had his own internal idea that was built on his frustration of the monotony of what he was going through. And then I realized, Japanese cinema changed because of a frustrated master. And so that's kind of where I first started putting it together. And then I think about people like, Hayao Miyazaki, who also is kind of like a frustrated master. And all the anime he makes is kind of not the same as the rest of the anime because his mastery has defined a set of guidelines and a process and a storytelling morality that he's incredibly consistent with. But he does it because he doesn't see it anywhere else, and he wants to tell his story his own way.
Something stand out. Things come full circle. Now Marvel are actually making an Ultraman comic. So amazing.
That's right, from Marvel.
Yeah, stunning. Walid Omar, what are the skill sets lacking in Southeast Asia?
Ooh, that's tough, and I certainly don't want to step on any toes. I will say that, let me do it from this other perspective. One thing I really respect about the American animation process and the American entertainment process, which I'm a firm believer in, is the incredible attention and education and discipline of the writing process. You know, which is we have schools and education, and we have a whole structure of how writers improve and how we give feedback to each other in writers' rooms, and mentorships, and all this thing leads to this incredible focus on writing as an admired discipline that is paid well for, that weeds out poor scripts. So I feel and have felt that, to maybe my own error, the European or the Asian script in mass statistics doesn't hold up to what I always love about American scripting. Just statistically, I feel that we deliver the flow of entertainment, even with really bad ideas.
All right. Moving on for more questions. Firstly, I just want to apologize if I am reading anybody's name incorrectly. This is the first time I'm seeing them, obviously. So on that note, Mika or Micah, not sure which one it is, Fernandez, for content creators like myself who want to get into creating longer narratives, what are the best practices of getting my pictures in the hands of producers or studios who can bring the material to life?
Good question. So as a development person, I get that asked a lot. I really find most of my day, kind of having people approach me and saying, can you get this to a distributor? Can you get this to a buyer? The little bit of Aikido that I always want to play back to people is one of the things that maybe industry newcomers don't understand, is that one of the requirements for a big distributor to really take sincere interest in your work is for you to complete something longer and narrative prior to actually going in. So it doesn't do that much good. I found I might be too conservative of having a brand new newcomer bring a Bible and a pitch to a distributor. What is better is for that newcomer to, complete screenplays, to do spec scripts on shows that have already been done, to complete a graphic novel, to prove that they have a theory of story, which is like the Bible or like the formula, but the execution you have to prove it. And there's almost no way to fake that. So I always tell people, it's not about getting you experience in long form by someone buying your pitch. You've got to do the long form for someone to be ready to buy your long form.
Understood. Fayez Zainal Abidin says, in terms of story and idea, do you think we need to follow the trend in the West, or just try to produce something fresh and original based on Southeast Asian trends, cultures, and taste, in a way promoting our culture in this region to the entire world?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I've said for the majority of my career, even when I was a buyer, you can never follow a trend. It just never works, I feel. And I don't think it's a way to create a breakthrough product. The only thing I think true creators should do is make the thing that they are uniquely qualified and passionate about making. So that to me is the secret for a long-term success. And if you look at any show that really has lasted for a long time, it wasn't there because someone had a trend-following idea. It was because someone really was so built to make that thing that it just kept pouring out of them, whether it was where they're from, or their gender, or their life experience, or their inspiration. No one can predict that. And actually, I remember when I pitched and sold Afro Samurai back in 2004 to Spike TV, nobody was asking for that. There was no convention where someone said, what we really want is a vengeful, super violent, black and white story with a black samurai. Like, nobody wanted that. But when I pitched it, it was so unique that it sold almost instantly.
Yeah, and of course the spin-offs from that, video games.
Yep.
Obviously
yeah,
it came back for a new season. Great game. Next question. Let's see. It's not completely in order. A fun one here. Why do you think the Mulan animation was better, writing and technicality-wise? That's from Faikin.
Wow, that is a deep dive. So I have been sitting on a script for my new surviving animation video called I Have to Talk About Mulan, because it's been on my mind since I saw the live action version, and I don't think it's my business to trash or make any criticism about a live action movie, because what do I know? I just make cartoons, right? But what I love about the original Mulan is that she is resourceful, that she is a lateral thinker, that she is not a fighter, but she brings, and this is the theme of the entire film in my mind, a new perspective to a male-dominated army. And that new perspective is her incredible secret power. And I think that is so much bigger an idea in general, you know, that it's your mind and your spirit and your point of view and your intelligence and your courage, more than anything else, that makes her a hero in that movie.
Angendran Kumar says, how do you promote something uniquely Southeast Asian that will be palatable to the general public, the world audience effectively? Ultimately, we need to make any such project financially viable. So how can we promote a Southeast Asian whilst making it a cultural form that people...
Without making it a what? Sorry?
So how can we promote a Southeast Asian narrative whilst making it a cultural form that people will actually want to watch? How do you balance it effectively?
Yeah, that's a pretty complicated question. And I think, you know, part of my presentation, maybe what I could have gone into more on is when I talk about local flora, the decoration of a proposal is, you know, the key first marketing element. But underneath that, you know, the real earth, I think, of any proposal are the solid foundations of that genre's rules. You know, so for example, if you're trying to present serial episodic sci-fi story, you know, what you have to do in the pilot, what your requirement is from a craft point of view is to paint a very specific world to get us interested in it, introduce a main character in kind of a slightly imbalanced homeostasis, and then to take that character out of that pseudo-comfort and onto a journey that they can never return from, right? And then before the end of the pilot episode, you need to have the audience see what the possible positive and negative conclusion of that problem is. You know, so all of that is the craft of writing. You know, if you get to the end of Breaking Bad's pilot, you already know what to worry about for all the seasons to come. So in a way, I don't want to specifically answer, you know, what is going to make a Southeast Asian thing palatable or whatever. I think the goal is put the floor on there to get people in, and then use the discipline of writing good entertainment to make it a world hit.
In that sense, could it also be viewed as almost educational, letting people discover the wonders and riches of what Southeast Asia has to offer?
That's correct. That's correct.
Hafiz again says, which option is the best to sell local 3D animation to the international market? Doing a subtitle and maintain the original, or doing an English dub which will destroy the lip sync? And I guess this is a long-going debate, isn't it? Funimation and Crunchyroll, for example.
Yeah, dub versus sub.
What's your take?
You know, I think that is a subtle point, you know, and I think there are good dubs and bad dubs. You know, I have done dubbing myself on Japanese product, and I've done subtitled product as well. I will say that when a dub really works, in my opinion, is when you truly let go of what the original culture kind of demands on it and really make it a native thing. So personally, I would rather hear a compelling actor rather than a lip-accurate recording, you know? So that's a really tough question. I mean, if that person who asked the question said, because the dubbing will destroy the quality, then what you're talking about is a bad dub. You know, by the way, I think Ghibli movies are dubbed very well. You know, I'll happily watch those in English. But yeah, I'm a little bit of a purist. I'll watch all my anime. Even a lot of my friends do anime dubbing, I will watch it in Japanese.
another question. In Malaysia, we don't have a lot of options in terms of network TV, cable or streaming, not as big as Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, or Disney. What would your advice be for us new writers to get our ideas and or scripts developed?
That's a really good question. That is a difficult one. I will say that the democratization of distribution is better than it's ever been. So although it's an uphill hustle, finding a way to directly distribute to your own audience is what a lot of people do every day and earn a lot of money doing it. So, like you look at a person like Domix, he makes much more than a moderate living telling his own stories his own way with his own visuals. So if you don't have the distributor support, if you don't have the massive, companies to buy from, I would say, one, seek self-distribution methods or seek a production methodology that's affordable, that lets you churn out stories and start to build audience. Then I would say, possibly look into and research the international co-production model, which is how you basically work with a bunch of different territories to piece together enough money to equal or exceed your production fund, or perhaps the production consortium model, which is trying to search for a collection of investors, all of which will take an equity stake in your material, but will let you make it, and any returns you'll then spread out among the people who invested in.
Okay, just browsing through, so waiting for any more questions coming in. Okay, I got one here from Oscar Gordon, who says, is the use of the narrative structure of 12 Stages Hero's Journey by Christopher Vogler the basis of storytelling in superhero animated films?
That's a deep dive. So I'm not sure if you can see, but I have a story and Robert McKee's book there, and I also have Hero of a Thousand Faces. I spent a lot of time in my college years also studying mythological storytelling and structure and things like that. It's all great. It's all really good. I will give a lot of credit to a gentleman named Jeff Gomez, who works for a company called Starlight Runner in New York, who really recently broke that. And he said, all of those classic storytelling structures are based on the idea of an agrarian society, of a character who leaves that society, gets incredible magical knowledge and brings it back to his home, and everyone's happy, and now you're a hero, right? But where are we now? We are in a fully connected, nuanced world that everyone relates to everyone all the time. I mean, the fact that something like Black Lives Matter can happen overnight, that we can all be part of a movement and we're all moving each other around. We are absolutely on a collective journey. We are much more of a hive mind than ever before. So I would challenge some of those rules. And I think that's what also might make something feel very dated. Someone might say, oh my God, you're just doing the original Star Wars, because that has the old model. But look at Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is actually a story where characters intertwine, and the final victim is actually the system, and do we buy into it or not? So I mean, that's a whole different structure than what the philosopher has been telling for hundreds of years, because they didn't have instantaneous access to millions of people and what they're thinking any minute, any second.
Suzanne Ryan says, how important is Australia as a partner, given we are a close neighbor and form part of the Asia-Pacific region?
Incredibly important. One for distribution and finance reasons, but also because just personally, the incredible great voices in film and in animation that come out of Australia. There's so much vibrant, original creativity out of there that I think it's it could be a real secret sauce, because if Southeast Asia can combine what Australia is doing in terms of brand and tone, did we just figure it out? We just figured it out.
It's Australia. Today. Yeah. It all comes down to Australia. Liati Yusuf says, is it important for content to hit locally before actually going global?
That's a good question. I mean, I think in this kind of global economy, a hit is a hit when its returns are more than its cost. So it doesn't matter where those returns come from. It matters that someone found it, and that there was some finance coming in that was greater than the production cost. So one thing that's popping into my mind is actually an anime from the early 2000s called Foodie Cootie. And Foodie Cootie was a stylish, strange anime that was really the foundation for the style of where they built the original Teen Titans. But Foodie Cootie was not a success in Japan. It was very niche. No one cared about it. But when it came to the US, everyone was like, this is incredible. So again, it's about, and again, in an interconnected society, you need to find believers. It doesn't necessarily have to be outside your own front door.
Okay. Just seeing if there's any more questions coming in here. Well, that's there. I'm going to ask you a question myself. I mean, what about the key concept of building and maintaining relationships in terms of who you work with, how you create content, from conception all the way to say, voice casting, for example?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Is that something that's always on your mind? Because personally, I think it's absolutely key.
Every day, every day. I mean, I think much more for a producer, you know, I think it is always so surprising how small the industry feels. But every person you encounter, at least in my 26 years, the ones that stay, they go from place to place to place, and they're a buyer, they're a distributor, they're a seller, they're a buyer again, they're a writer, they're a director, you know. And we find, I like to think of myself as, you know, one of the Congress people in the business of cartoons, and there are senators and presidents and, you know, diplomats and House of Representative people, at least to put it in American government terms. We all have to know each other to make things work. And there was an article written in Animation Magazine really a long time ago called Take the Lunch. And it was the idea that, you know, you, as a producer specifically, you need to be engaging with people, and you need to be listening to them, and you need to be talking to them, and you need to really establish that you are a fluid communicator, because not many people want to buy something from someone they never met before or met the first time. So, you know, network communication is, you know, one of those things. Without it, it's very difficult to survive. And with it, ironically, to play the LA card, you could be terrible at everything else. Yeah. But in many ways, if you know everybody and they know you and they're comfortable with you, you can connect the dots.
Can I ask another question which just came into my head? You're talking about being a rebel master, of creating new content, of doing something fresh. I think that's one of the key messages I've taken. But what about banking on the nostalgia factor as well? Look at things like Stranger Things, for example. That banks on people of a certain generation remembering the 80s. Even now, for example, I use Waze a lot, which is for me to get around, right? They have Kevin Conroy voicing Batman. Kevin Conroy was the voice of Batman back in 1992 when I was a kid growing up. He's done it in the video games. There's this nostalgia, this attraction, which draws me to it as well. How do you balance that?
That's a really good question. You know, I think we are a retro, fascinated world. You know, I mean, we like things old and new, but we like things that are old and repackaged as new. And I think, if I think about something like Stranger Things, for example, like, you know, to kind of make my prior point, yes, it's got great nostalgia. Yes, it's absolutely the 80s and, you know, Dungeons and Dragons and Rush and, you know, that zone. But it is absolutely a very well-refined kids' horror adventure story. You know, it's very disciplined. So I always like to say that, you know, there's never the one thing. There's all the things have to work together like a pop song. So yes, we're retro inspired, and yes, it's cool that Kevin Conroy is the voice in Waze, but that's never the one thing. You've got to add it all up to something more. But one thing you did bring up, which I will kind of draft off of, is the incredible IP business on animation is so incredible that, you know, we are so affected by Kevin Conroy's Batman that we're willing 20, 30 years later to download him as a voice for Waze. That's the power of animation getting into the hearts and minds of people. Yep.
Nadia Razif says, is it important to focus on the character development that gives them individuality like they do now with Ninja Turtles? Or does the storyline matter?
Yeah, you've stepped into the endless question, which is plot or character. There really is no right answer. I think that there are some styles of storytelling. I'll take Miyazaki because we brought him up. He doesn't necessarily introduce you to a very unique, original, idiosyncratic person. He gives you a daughter, a dad, a brother, a wizard's apprentice, and from that creates a very complicated plot, and that character becomes specific through that plot, right? Which is a plot-driven way to do it. The other way, the character-based way is to say, hey, can we assign to these Ninja Turtles some basic tropes that differentiate them from each other, and then hope that people will kind of get a brand from those ideas, and then we can play with it in script and story. I kind of go back and forth. Again, to me, it's very difficult to solve that in theory. You've got to actually taste it. So in many ways, development executives, writers, directors, we become the wine tasters of content. So you could be right, you could be wrong. I've just got to mix it up, sniff it, drink it, and I'll tell you, or I'll do it. It's really good.
On the topic of existing IPs, where's the line between character development and shock value? Like, you've got a Captain America shield behind you.
Dude, I've also got a Captain America tattoo.
Oh, there you go. Do you remember the comics not too long ago, Hail Hydra?
Yes, I do.
That was seismic. That made it worldwide.
Yep.
But it felt more like shock value than actually development. Now, obviously, storyline would progress. We don't need to get into that. But where's the line for you?
I mean, that's tough. I mean, making a stunt and breaking a character is a very dangerous thing. I mean, it's you're talking about characters that people invested their lives into, and when you affect them and change them, it's seismic. So when Captain America died in Civil War in 2008, it was front headline New York Times, and that was an effective stunt. When he revealed that he was evil, that was not a great stunt, But then again, when Miles Morales was presented as Latino black, incredible success, When they divided Superman into 4 individual Supermans because they killed him, that was a huge failure. So to me, I think I admire those brands for going for it. They do have to kind of run the meat grinder of keeping those characters fresh all the time. Who knows if everyone will like Robert Pattinson? You just got to do it because IP has to live longer than the individual execution.
This question from Jack, who says, animation industry in Malaysia is heavily focused on 3D animation content. What do you think about the potential of 2D animation in content creation, as we are seeing more 2D content in the West as compared to 3D?
Yeah, the discussion of the medium is always, I find, slightly, it could be contentious. It could be built on your stereotype of what you think the tool can or cannot do. To me, it's more about the person using the tool than the actual tool, right? So one of my favorite directors of all time is a guy named Kon Satoshi, who did a movie called Paprika. He also did Tokyo Godfathers. He draws in a very realistic animated style, and it was brought to his attention many times, why do you do animation? Because all your stuff is basically like real people. And his answer was great. He was like, I don't know, this is just how I draw. So to me, if a 3D tool gives you the most direct access to your creativity, that's the tool you should use. If 2D animation lets you get to what you want to get to in the most purest way, then you should go that way. So I'd rather talk about it from the talent side, because the craft is capable of anything. I have laughed and cried and felt triumphant and sad with 3D animation, rotoscope, 2D, stop motion, at all. It's just, is it done well or is it not done well?
Any books that you could suggest on the topic of international co-production module you mentioned? Thank you for the great answers, he says.
Oh, you're welcome. I gotta say, I hope I don't slip too much into self-promotion. There's not a lot of good literature about the business of cartoons, and there's not a lot of good educational sources. So why I created Surviving Animation is because I felt the gap in that. And, there's tons of stuff about how to make and how to write and how to direct and how to draw. But, you know, the other side, the producer side, is all like word of mouth and gut check. And of course, a lot of it's based on business fundamentals, but a lot of it's based on us kind of like looking at the ticker tape of the animation industry every year and calling up colleagues and saying, you know, what's happening? Who are you buying from? What's the newest show? Do you find a new hot artist, director? Or, you know, you go to a territory like, you know, when I went to Singapore and I learned about how all of the systems work there, or when I went to Thailand or China and saw how it was done, that was the only way I could figure it out, was by actually going. So, you know, I will be putting out some literature soon, but I think there's a big lack of books about the business of animation. Although
Miles,
Catherine Winder wrote a really good one called Producing Animation, which was one of my original Bibles. I read the first one in 2001, and I think she updated it in like 2017 or 18. Producing Animation is very good.
Producing Animation by who? Sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Catherine Winder.
Catherine Winder, okay. Miles, who I wish was spelt the same way as Miles Morales, but it's with a Y. How much weight do you give to the difference in coming-of-age experience in Southeast Asia vis-a-vis with the West when evaluating IP demand? Gen Z in Southeast Asia is stratified across a broad socio-econ gap.
That's a really good question. So I will go one step further. It is now Generation Alpha. We passed Z. So Alpha is actually if you were born after 2010. So remember, if you are 10 years old today, you were born in 2010, the Gen Z experience no longer is part of your fundamental experience. So if you're talking about a coming-of-age story, so let's broadly say you're focusing it on a 9 to 14 audience, 6 to 11 would be a little young for coming of age, maybe. If you started now, by the time it came out, it's got to be alpha relevant, not Z relevant. But what you're saying is really, really good, because you need to respect the classics and then understand the current culture. And that's the balance of those two things that will always make a relevant work. You know, a relevant piece of science fiction or fantasy or comedy has one foot in reality and one foot in pure fantasy.
Giggle Garage have a question. We have an animated feature idea based on Southeast Asian flora and fauna, targeting Hollywood and global. What should be our first step to make this the next animated global hit?
Write the screenplay if it's a feature. You know, I mean, I think a pitch or an idea or a brand is fantastic. It gets you in the room, it gets you there. But if you want to make a global hit, my feeling is that the script is going to be the first big barrier to getting a large amount of financing. You know, so if you can achieve that high level of script, and that has to be, you know, basically, at least in my mind, Hollywood, you know, checked off in terms of quality, in terms of people who are on it, in terms of execution. It's got to be an incredible page turner to get the momentum to start going further than that. That'd be my gut.
Sinan Ismail says, what do you think about edutainment, not so basically education, in case you can't hear me clearly across the Zoom platform, animations,
I can
cartoon,
hear you, yeah.
And its potential towards going global?
I love it. I love edutainment. I mean, one of my favorite shows right now is Ask the Storybots on Netflix. And I'm going to quote a good friend of mine named Corey Jones. He used to work at Blizzard. Now he has his own game company called Cryptozoic. He told me, if everything educated was animated, I'd be a genius, because I'll watch any education animated. So I think it's an incredible medium. That doesn't mean you should just do it because it's an incredible medium. You have to have a personal passion about educating in order to make a successful education show. And I will also say, one of the strangest, most interesting edutainment shows right now is Midnight Gospel on Netflix. Because what they did is took the podcast and basically animated through a podcast. So it's a deep dive, 30-minute discussion about existentialism, religion, you know, magic, and all this stuff. But you're watching it as a cartoon, and I am absolutely hooked on that show.
Here's a question from someone I actually know. I hope it's the same person. Irene, who says, how can animation be a short-term gain versus waiting for the long tail?
Well, a short-term gain is going to mean a full commission or a production fund that's going to be larger than your budget. So the immediate gain would be a production margin. So most animation production companies operate on the idea that if we sell shows and make it for a little bit less, we keep that percentage, keeps the lights on. So I think that's going to be the immediate way to get it. Long tail, I think, is, it's a marketing discussion. It's about, how consumer products and IP exploitation is successful. But I think, especially even in the YouTube space, you can start to monetize and merchandise much more immediately. And I think if you maybe even get ahead of the game, whether it's a small merchandise deal or a consumer products plan or a toyetic concept, you can get ahead of the game and start monetizing before you actually go into the animation process. Or you could start with that product and say, listen, I've got a show about a cool art vinyl toy, so I'm going to start making their art vinyl toy first. There's a famous character in Japan called Black Rock Shooter. They made millions of dollars before they ever animated it. It was the reverse. The toy was so successful, they wanted to then go even wider to make entertainment, to make people buy more toys. But it wasn't animation and toys. It was toys and animation.
Is that also G.I. Joe, if memory serves me right?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if G.I. Joe is definitely toy first, because that toy came out, I think, in the 60s.
In the 60s.
And it went through all these different iterations before they made the 80s TV series.
Yeah. Question here, a very serious question actually from Kyril, who says, should censorship laws of ideas grow with the times, or should the creative industry, especially in animation and illustrated content, find ways around these standards? In the context of some Southeast Asian countries, some types of contents that do not fit with more conservative will be heavily censored or outright reprimanded. It's a great question.
It's a fantastic question and a very, very serious one. I mean, I could not ever promote anyone go against their government to make a piece of art. That is a personal, very serious decision. I will say that there are the right times and places to give messaging. There is the right art form for messaging. And I struggle, with looking at a proposal, for example, that might be pushing an issue. So when a piece of entertainment pushes an issue, more often than not, I think it sacrifices entertainment, So just be careful with that line, because maybe you're in the wrong genre. If your message that just throws something out is really, save the world from pollution, maybe what you need to be doing is an animated documentary rather than a serial episodic fantasy that's shoving down my throat conservatism. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you got to find that right balance. Or you've got to say, this is my mission. This is the thing I believe in and I want to promote. Then you got to give it to a writer who knows how to hide the ball so that it's not boring people or being, pandering to them, but being entertainment first and then messaging second. That would be my feeling.
A question here from Hafiz again. Animation series in Malaysia are heavily focused to attract kids, mostly. What's your advice for us on how to attract all ages to like and watch an animation series, especially adult and teens? And I just want to add, we have 5 more minutes left with you, so any questions, please send them in right now. Sorry, Eric.
It's tough. You're talking about trying to get all audiences. Usually that's not the TV format. That's that's the film world. And then, to talk Hollywood terms, you're talking about a 4-quadrant film. So 4-quadrant meaning older men, older women, younger boys, younger girls. So if you want to attract all audiences, the 4-quadrant theory of trying to make a piece of entertainment that somehow intuitively grabs them all is really the only success. But I think for television, I believe in finding your key main target first and make them the core believers. And then let the halo be the bonus, So, I thought Steven Universe was not made to get, cool kids and hipsters and design friends to watch it. It was made to be a kid show, and that's what it's good at. All the rest of it is a bonus. So that's always my way to make sure the entertainment is pure.
To Walid, he missed Eric's answer about skill sets lacking in Southeast Asia. Just a direct message because we only have a few minutes left with Eric. So this might be the final question. Mary Wati says, "Hi Eric, if you have the option, what type of content or IP would you want to create now, right now, and why?" Let's get in your mindset here.
I'm gonna spoil. I'm gonna put this out into the world. I think it's a really good time for romance. I think it's one of the true genres that Japan owns that the West hasn't done really well. I think it's a way, if we can bring the trend in kids graphic novel and YA into the animated world and get kids exploring complicated romantic emotions in their teen years, I think that's a mission worth having. And I'm a softie. I like romances a lot, even though you see all this stuff over here. And so I would love to see more, slice of life, magical realism, romantic stories that have, at its core, people loving each other, worrying about each other, caring about each other, and being hurt by being alone or separated, sad. I mean, to me, that's what I feel we need right now.
Is that in relation to what's happening around the world? Are you reacting to circumstances which affect your mindset, and perhaps you think that's what the world emotionally needs more than anything else?
I think it could be, because I feel like there's a time and place when true escapist apocalyptic craziness is good, and there's times when we really just want to feel that we're connected with people again. There's this Filipino idea of kapwa, which is connection between people and our friendship and closeness to each other. And as a Filipino, I feel very lacking in the personal contact with people all the time. So I yearn for serious connectivity and real experience with people. And who's to say that they can't be shown and expressed in animation?
Okay, well, my time is up. All our time is up with you, Eric. It's been such a pleasure. Obviously, we know you have your own YouTube channel. Are there any other platforms that people could reach out to you further that you would like to share?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I like to, kind of talk about industry trends and things happening there. YouTube is my main expression of education. And I'm a very below average Twitterer. And I have very expected pictures of my dog on Instagram. So there you go.
Understood. Everyone loves a pet picture. Eric, all the best. I know it's obviously ticking away. It's Tuesday evening for you, so you probably want to hit the sack very soon. But we'll speak to you again very, very soon, okay?
Thank you very much for having me.
All the best. Bye.
Okay, bye.
I don't know about you, but I found that absolutely fascinating. There's plenty more in store just like that throughout the course of today and tomorrow. But we're going to take a very short break for now. We'll be back at Malaysian time, 11:30, which is, if my math is correct, 18 minutes time. See you soon.